Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time For This? The series that looks at old and new video games from indie to AAA and everything in between to help you figure out if you've got the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or to just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Today we're shining our boots and donning the badge to join the Precinct, an indie game developed by Fallen Tree Games. I played a demo of this game back during my Demo Dump series, and safe to say by the end, I was wanting more. This game's incredible. Hell yes. No! No! The Precinct is essentially a late 80s Hollywood cop movie brought to life, with lots of saxophone music, stereotypical characters, and car chases. You play as Nick Cordell Jr., a rookie cop working his way up the force, who joined after his father, Nick Cordell Sr., was murdered in a case that's still unsolved. You work your way up from littering and parking tickets to full-on gang warfare. And whilst this indie game has the looks, the heart and the gameplay systems of a great game, it does have some shortcomings. I'm playing the Precinct on my beefy PC via Steam, and this game looks beautiful. Performance wise, I've had no graphical or frame rate issues, and I've seen no reports of any performance issues on PC or console, which from an indie studio is great to see. Something to note when it comes to console, at the time of writing there's a pretty serious save bug stopping you from progressing in the game, that they have just fixed, but I definitely make sure to check before buying. Now don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. It's time to hit the siren and see if we can't clean up the mean streets of Averno City.
On Fenwick intersection 6.
Target is down.
Ground units will take it from here. Get that spotlight on the target.
The Precinct starts off really strong with its introduction, showing you the ropes with the 3 different types of beat you can run as a cop. As these are very authored experiences, you get a feel for the ropes, alongside how cinematic and action-packed the game can get at a drop of a hat. Where I think this game will likely lose some people is once this tutorial ends and you get into the actual meat of the game, alongside how you progress the quote-unquote story, but before we get into that, let's run through the 3 different shift types and how they work. Firstly, you have the on-foot shifts, which are usually for smaller crimes that don't involve having to do high-speed pursuits or anything. Typically, you'll be doling out parking tickets, stopping vandals, and the occasional mugger. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock things like gang shootouts, but the large majority of the game will be dealing with these smaller petty crimes to build up your experience and crime-fighting knowledge. Next you have the driving sections, where you'll be expected to mainly catch drunk drivers and people speeding, which can often result in high intensity car chases and a whole load of carnage. Following this are the airborne helicopter sequences, where you essentially fly overhead and shine the spotlight at criminals to build up a meter, then call in reinforcements to do the actual arresting on the ground level. For me, this started out as my favourite activity, but after doing it once, the level of disconnect you get being so out of the action really makes it feel a bit boring. The way the Precinct works is at the start of the day, you're given a list of shifts to choose from that will have a set patrol area alongside fitting into one of the 3 different shift types: on foot, driving, or flying the helicopter. Whilst the theme of the crimes can vary depending on how much you progress through the game, this is how the game plays out: set shifts with an option down the line to customize your own, picking the patrol area, crime type, and patrol method. As a result, what you pick can vary massively what type of experience you have that day. If you happen to pick checking parking meters, you could literally be doing just that, throwing your siren on just to stop 5 seconds later to chuck a ticket onto a car parked at a fire hydrant.
Fire on the roof.
Alternatively, you could be in shootouts for the entirety of your shift. There's simply no way of knowing until you get stuck into your patrol, and even if you pick something low risk, it doesn't mean it'll stay that way. There are 2 progression mechanics in the game. One for the story and one for your police level. Both are subject to the randomized nature of the crimes you face, but there are ways to tip it in your favour. I think this is where the core gameplay might turn people off, as instead of being a GTA-like game where you play as a cop, it's more of a simulation, and your police level progression is the biggest example of this. As this is a fairly realistic yet basic depiction of police work in America, there's an extremely extensive handbook of every single crime in the game. alongside the proper procedure on how to handle it down to the steps you interact with the suspect. This may sound really boring and complicated, but I assure you in practice it's not complicated at all. Basically, you'll be notified of a crime, you'll head over and the subject will either surrender, fight you, or run, and once you've dealt with them appropriately, you'll put them in cuffs and be able to interact with them in a few different ways. Checking their ID, searching them, or breathalyzing them if they're driving will all give you ways to earn extra XP when the crime is completed. The main problem comes from the fact you have to do this to every single person you arrest. So every time you interact with a suspect, you check the ID, search, add crimes, read rights, then escort to the station. Fallen Tree games must have known this would get boring, as they have the option to delegate paperwork and call in backup to escort the suspect to the station to skip out some of these more admin type activities, but to maximize your XP, you're better off doing it yourself. This makes the end part of every gameplay section a bit of a grind and often super repetitive, especially when there's multiple suspects who need dealing with.
What did you think of that?
Well, I won't argue that it was a no-holds-barred, adrenaline-fueled thrill ride, but there's no way you could perpetrate that amount of carnage and mayhem and not incur a considerable amount of paperwork.
It's not necessarily a bad thing if you're into simulation games and like this sort of thing, and they have put it on a handy radial menu to make things snappy, but there is a limit on how much I'll personally put up with, and I was almost there with this game. You're also massively incentivized to get this XP as well, as leveling up allows you to unlock more patrol vehicles, weapons, locations, and shift types to make the game more interesting than finding people over dropping litter. You also have a fairly bare bones skill tree you can sink a point into every time you level up. These range from carrying more ammo, taking less damage, and having more stamina, to more interesting things like being able to commandeer civilian vehicles. The second progression loop in the game is for the story. I call this a story very loosely, as to be honest, there isn't really one until the end of the game. What you do here is collect evidence on 2 different gangs, and every time you fill up an evidence bar, you'll get a special mission to go out and bring in one of these major crime bosses. These main story missions are unfortunately not very interesting, or very good, as the main shifts you normally do have the option to expand and cascade into more interesting and bespoke situations, whereas these are very scripted and basic car chases or shootouts, with very little to talk about in between. As I say, once you have dealt with these 2 gangs, the story becomes significantly more interesting and leaves you wondering where this level of writing and mission design was to begin with. Another downside to this main mission progression, and I promise we'll get a positive soon as I do really like this game, is the gathering of the evidence itself. Evidence drops everywhere, whether it be a weapon during a mugging, a spray can during a vandalism case, or something you find on someone during a pat-down or vehicle search. The problem with this evidence is the fact that not all of it is attributed to the specific gangs you were looking for. More often than not, it's just general evidence, which does absolutely nothing to help you progress. You can somewhat game the system by keeping an eye out for gang members or their cars, which are always red or purple with the gang insignia, and pulling them over to optimize your evidence gathering, but the actual system itself feels a little bit of a letdown, especially when you have a random chance of progressing towards a fairly lackluster main mission. So, now the main gripes, basic setup and progression is covered, how's the actual gameplay? Well, this one is also a bit of a mixed bag. Shooting is a bit wonky and you need to unlock the higher tier guns to enjoy it properly, and the driving is really responsive and quite fun to do once you get the hang of it. There's something about the feel of getting a call in, slamming on the siren and putting your foot to the floor as you race over to the scene of a shootout that feels unmatched in similar simulation games. Aside from shooting and driving, you also have a meter that fills up when you do your job well, like tailing a car without losing them, or having the spotlight of the helicopter never leave the suspect. At this point, once the meter is filled, you can call in additional support in the form of more patrol cars, officers on foot, spike traps, helicopters and more to help you stop the criminal in their tracks. While some of the support options are without doubt more helpful than others, the small amount you start with are more than enough to keep the city free of crime. And whilst we're on the crimes themselves, let's talk about what I'm dubbing in this video as the crime cascade. This is where the precinct truly shines, when it all goes Pete Tong. During the course of a crime, there's a level of force you're allowed to use. This stops you from straight shooting every suspect you come across and ensures there's a sense of realism where you can only respond appropriately to a crime. As such, you can attend a street fight where 2 people are fighting with their hands, but then once you show up, one might pull a gun and grab a civilian as a human shield. At this point, their gunfire might spook a civilian driving a car, causing a 3-car pileup. Then whilst you're dealing with all of that, one of the gangs tries to drive by shooting on you. Once everything settles down, someone in the car accident happens to have been DUI, so they jump in the car and start a high-speed pursuit. In these moments, where everything goes to hell and there's about 5 or 6 crimes all happening at once, with gunfire everywhere resulting in a car chase with multiple squad cars and a helicopter overhead, is where the precinct genuinely gets great. The fact there's enough systems under the hood to have both quiet and extremely loud, unique, bespoke gameplay sections that evolve over time in such a small indie game is incredible, and Fallen Tree Games should be lauded for this. Aside from doing your usual shift work and all of the crimes on offer, you can also take part in some very light touch side missions. There's a driving time trial type mission, collectible artifacts with riddles, and street races where you pull up in your squad car, then magically get into street clothes to have a race with some criminals. Honestly, pretty much all of these activities felt tacked on to extend the runtime, and a good 99% of them I could do without breaking much of a sweat, with the exception of the jump ramps, which just felt straight out of place in the game. Moving on from the gameplay, I want to cover the look and feel of this game. For a small budget made within Unity, man, this game is pretty. The art style Fallen Tree Games chose here looks like a cross between the Grand Theft Auto loading screens and the old spy game 13. It looks equal parts realistic in terms of the environments, whilst all of the people look like cel-shaded cartoon versions of the real thing. It's the sort of thing you don't really notice at a glance, but once you look closer, it's just so cool.
I just think they're neat.
Environments are also really destructible, more so than you'd commonly expect in a fully rendered city with interactable people and vehicles, meaning when you're tearing through the streets you can crash through walls and fences as shortcuts to catch the perp. On top of this high budget look and great art style, you also have the incredibly smooth soundtrack by Gavin Harrison. Mixing the smooth saxophone with synth beats, you get something that hits the 80s cop vibe this game is going for perfectly, and I even spent time listening to the soundtrack once I'd completed the game. It's that good to listen to. When all of these parts come together, you get an experience that truly grips you. Chasing someone through the streets with the rain beating down, the 80s soundtrack playing as you smash through a backyard to get the jump on them, then calling a roadblock to head them off at the next intersection and shoot out their tires absolutely nails the Lethal Weapon and Heat style vibe. It's really effective at immersing you in the world. When it doesn't work, you can just have the suspect's AI just keep vaulting the same fence over and over again or drive into a wall, but this is so rare, you get the feel the developers went for here more often than you don't. So let's get down to it. How long does this game take? I completed the main story of the Precinct, locking away all the major crime bosses and doing the majority of the side activities, and this brought me to 12 hours total playtime. Due to the random drop rate of the key evidence you need for each gang, which you can slightly manipulate in your favour, it's hard to say what a mainline playthrough of this game actually is, but I'd say it's around 9 hours. If you're wanting to prove you're Averno's finest, completing all side activities and achievements, it'll take you 16 hours. The achievements in the Precinct aren't too hard to get. Most are just your classic completionist stuff of complete every side activity. The main one that's likely to take the majority of your time, even with a guide, would be the achievement to commandeer every vehicle in the game. There's not a huge number of vehicles to find in Averno City, but it's definitely due to take up the most of your time if you're chasing the 100%. When you look at the time spent, considering the cost is around $25 or £25 at full price, I'd say this was worth it. It's a very detailed game with a lot of moving parts, and the fact you can get a good 10 hours plus of quality indie gameplay here, I'd say it's worth the price. The only real issue for spending time with this game is the fact that once you start a shift, you're kind of locked into it. The game will autosave when completing side activities, but in order to save and quit, you'll have to manually end the shift you've chosen and then quit out. This means you won't lose any XP, but if you do quit without ending the shift, you will. So make sure you have a good 20 minutes or so to play at a time. This definitely isn't a drop in, drop out kind of game. The simulation aspect definitely sets in when you have to complete a shift to save your progress. It's definitely worth completing a shift at a time, so carve out some reasonable time in your day to play it, say half an hour to an hour. I can recommend the Precinct, but only if you're a certain kind of gamer. When the crime cascade is in full force, there's bullets flying and people everywhere with a million things to sort through, and the streets are buzzing as you race down the street in your squad car, sirens blazing, I'd suggest everyone play this game. However, this comes with a huge caveat that this game is clearly trying to be a simulation first and foremost, with a heavy emphasis on doing things by the book, and sometimes having to accept that as an officer of the law, you have limitations. Couple this with the weird story progression resulting in a somewhat underbaked and too little too late narrative, I can see why many people would be turned off. Reasonably priced, no microtransactions, and a fun sandbox for you to play in, the Precinct does a lot right to make it stand out as a noteworthy indie game of 2025. It has so many moving parts at once that result in bespoke gameplay interactions you often can't find in today's AAA titles, and this game should definitely have its flowers for making such a fun, evolving game. Most likely held back by its budget in terms of its scope alongside the devotion to realism, the Precinct nails the 80s cop action movie feeling that when I start to play, I realise,
I'm too old for this.
For the majority of my 12 hours with the Precinct, I had a blast keeping the streets of Averno City safe. but ultimately it needs a bigger focus on story, a little more polish and more meaningful side content, with a streamlined progression system to truly reach the heights of its potential. I can't wait to see what Fallen Tree Games does next, and whether you vibe with this game or not, you have to praise what this indie game manages to accomplish here. Do you have time for the Precinct? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game alongside a bit more of a deep dive on the time you have to invest, so you know what you're getting into, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you subscribe, I'm looking to put out regular content like this, alongside some more in-depth video essays and freeform videos, so stick around, and if you have any requests on future videos, just drop them in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.